12 men stepped into the jungle, but not all of them made it out the same. They wore loincloths, roared across movie screens, and became symbols of raw, untamed masculinity. But behind the vines and vines of fame were tangled lives full of scandal, ambition, and secrets Hollywood tried to bury. Some were Olympic gods turned movie stars. Others were desperate unknowns swinging for a second chance. A few nearly died doing their own stunts. And one, he turned down the role that could have made him immortal. If you grew up on Saturday matinees, jungle reruns, or flipping through old fan magazines, you know the legend. But do you know the men who became Tarzan? We're counting down 12 unforgettable kings of the jungle and the truth behind the L. Stay close, because by the time we reach the final name, you'll realize the wildest stories weren't on screen, they were behind the scenes. Johnny Weissmuller, the golden body, in the jungle mist. Before the jungle had a voice, Johnny Weissmuller gave it a roar. He wasn't just the first talking Tarzan, he was the one who set the mold. When he stepped onto the screen in Tarzan the Ape Man, 1932, audiences had never seen anything like him. Carved from Olympic gold and Hollywood fantasy, Weissmuller wasn't an actor by trade. He was a 5-time gold medalist swimmer who had barely spoken on camera before being handed one of the most physically demanding roles in film history. And yet somehow it worked. It more than worked. It transformed him into a legend. By the time the 1940s rolled in, Weissmuller's Tarzan had become something larger than cinema. He was the jungle. His voice, a primal, unearthly yell, was stitched into the soundscape of an entire generation. But as the years wore on, the vine swinging grew heavier. The stories behind the scenes became more complicated. Weissmuller didn't just play Tarzan, he became him in the public eye. And that came with a cost. Behind the glistening muscles and stoic stare was a man trying to hold on to a role that was slipping from him, film by film. The studios wanted younger blood. He was pushing 40. But fans didn't care. To them, there was only one Tarzan. That kind of devotion becomes a trap. When Weissmuller finally took his last swing through the jungle in Tarzan and the Mermaids, 1948, the vines had grown tangled. The stunts were dangerous. His body bore the weight of a decade of jungle survival, both on screen and off. But here's the truth. No one ever replaced him. Every Tarzan who came after would live in his shadow, trying to match a myth that Johnny Weissmuller had already become. Lex Barker, the Tarzan who was too perfect to last. He had the jawline of a god, the pedigree of a prince, and the impossible task of replacing a legend. When Lex Barker stepped into the jungle, audiences weren't sure whether to cheer or compare. He followed Johnny Weissmuller, the Tarzan, and that meant every flex, every yell, every vine swing was measured against the man who came before. But Barker didn't imitate. He reinvented. With Tarzan's magic fountain in 1949, Barker's version was something new. Polished, eloquent, almost regal. His Tarzan walked with purpose, spoke in full sentences, and looked like he'd stepped out of a department store window, if the window were carved from granite. Gone was the wild man. In his place stood a jungle hero who seemed born to lead. But Hollywood isn't kind to replacement kings. Though Barker played the role 5 times, his run was always shadowed by whispers. Too clean, too smooth, too pretty to be primal. Studios marketed him hard, but the jungle had moved on. Or maybe it just preferred its icons a little more bruised. Off-screen, Barker's life veered into strange territory. He found the fame he missed in America overseas, especially in Germany, where he became a box office sensation. While Hollywood quietly closed its doors, Europe handed him a crown. He starred in westerns, thrillers, swashbucklers. The loincloth was long gone, but its shadow followed. Lex Barker was Tarzan for a new age, one that didn't stick. He played the part like a prince exiled to the jungle, always looking like he might return to civilization if the right ship came ashore. And maybe that's why his version lingers, not for how wild it was, but for how close it came to something untouchable. Gordon Scott, the Tarzan who fought like a gladiator. He didn't swing into the role. He crashed into it. When Gordon Scott stepped into the jungle, it felt less like casting and more like combat. After Lex Barker's polished Prince of the Vines, Scott's Tarzan hit the screen like a storm, all muscle, grit, and raw intensity. There was no refinement, no Hollywood gloss. This was a Tarzan with dirt under his nails and blood on his chest. Scott wasn't born in the business. He was discovered working as a hotel lifeguard, a walking statue with the look of a Roman war god and the instincts of a fighter. The studio didn't just see a new Tarzan, they saw power. Real, visceral power. And from the moment he appeared in Tarzan's Hidden Jungle, 1955, audiences saw it too. He wasn't acting the strength, he was the strength. What made Gordon Scott different wasn't just his physique, though it was formidable even by Tarzan standards, but the way he moved. His stunts felt heavier, his fights more brutal, his presence more dangerous. The jungle didn't seem like a backdrop anymore. It felt like a battlefield, and Scott was its champion. Over 6 Tarzan films, Scott evolved the role. Early on, he played the grunting wild man, but gradually his Tarzan became smarter, more self-aware, without ever losing that primal edge. His last outing, Tarzan the Magnificent, 1960, was exactly that: brutal, bold, unforgettable. After the loincloth, Scott took his strength elsewhere, to Italian sword and sandal epics, where he played gladiators and warriors with the same deadly charm. But for a stretch in the late 50s, Gordon Scott wasn't just playing Tarzan. He was what Tarzan was always meant to be: fierce, fearless, and one wrong move from fight. Denny Miller, the one-swing wonder. One movie, one loincloth, one shot. Denny Miller's time in the jungle lasted only 90 minutes, but his brief reign left behind one of the strangest, most fascinating chapters in Tarzan history. In 1959, MGM decided it was time to return to its roots, a remake of 1932's Tarzan the Ape Man, the same film that made Johnny Weissmuller a legend. For that, they needed a new jungle king. Not just a man who looked the part, they wanted lightning in a bottle. Enter Denny Miller. A former UCLA basketball player turned contract actor, Miller was blonde, built, and had a kind of beachside American charm that made him feel more like a surfer than a savage. MGM saw potential. Audiences weren't sure what they were seeing. Miller's only Tarzan film reused massive chunks of footage from earlier movies, stitched together with new scenes featuring Miller and a mostly silent script. He grunted, growled, and climbed trees like a natural, but the movie itself felt more like a studio experiment than a proper jungle adventure. There were no follow-ups, no sequels, no second chance, but that single swing still counted. Miller later joked that he played Tarzan with more makeup than dialogue, and while the film didn't launch a franchise, it did mark a turning point, the moment Tarzan truly became a role anyone could step into, if they had the look. And Miller had the look, even if just for one film. After Tarzan, Denny Miller built a long career in TV and commercials, always working, always remembered. But for fans of Hollywood's vine-swinging legacy, he'll always be the Tarzan who came, swung, and vanished. Jock Mahoney, the stuntman who became the star. Before he wore the loincloth, he was the guy jumping off cliffs so other actors didn't have to. Jock Mahoney didn't just play Tarzan. He earned Tarzan the hard way. For years, he was the invisible man of Hollywood action. If you saw someone diving from a waterfall or wrestling a crocodile in an old adventure flick, chances are it was Jock. Uncredited, unseen, unbreakable. He was leaner than most Tarzans, tall, sharp-featured, more like a jungle gunslinger than a muscle-bound brute. And ironically, Mahoney's first appearance in a Tarzan film wasn't as Tarzan at all. He played the villain opposite Gordon Scott in Tarzan the Magnificent, 1960. But the jungle had other plans for him. By 1962, he had the lead. In Tarzan Goes to India and Tarzan's 3 Challenges, Mahoney brought something no other actor had before: grace. He moved like a panther, not bulky but agile, fluid, lethal. His Tarzan was thoughtful, restrained, and impossibly physical. It didn't matter that he was in his 40s by the time he took the role. Mahoney did stunts most men half his age wouldn't dare, including a legendary free fall off a massive dam that still makes stunt historians flinch. But time and travel wore him down. The exotic shoots were punishing. Illness nearly pulled him out mid-production. Still, he pushed on. Because Mahoney wasn't just playing the hero, he was the guy who showed the heroes how to do it in the first place. He may not be the most famous Tarzan, but for those who know the role and know the risk behind it, Jock Mahoney is pure jungle legend. A man who came from the shadows, took the spotlight, and never once backed down from the leap. Mike Henry, the Tarzan built like a linebacker. He didn't swing through the jungle, he bulldozed through it. Mike Henry looked like a man sculpted for war, not wilderness. A former NFL linebacker with the Rams, he brought something to Tarzan no one had before: pure, crushing force. This wasn't the jungle raised him, he took it. Tarzan had always been strong, but with Henry, he became something else entirely. Dangerous, commanding, almost mythic. When Tarzan and the Valley of Gold began filming in 1965, producers wanted to modernize the character: new tone, new locations, even new villains. They got that and then some. Henry's Tarzan was part jungle man, part secret agent. In one moment, he's bare-chested in the brush. In the next, he's tossing grenades and delivering lines like Bond in a loincloth. It could have been ridiculous. With Henry, it was cool. But behind the scenes, things got rough. The production was chaotic, shot across brutal terrain with limited safety. Henry took real hits, physically and emotionally. He endured injuries, illness, even a well-publicized incident with an animal co-star that left more than a mark. By the third film, he'd had enough. Despite a 3-picture deal, he almost didn't finish the trilogy. He walked away from a planned Tarzan TV series, a move that would change another man's life. We'll get to him soon. Still, for a brief, brilliant moment, Mike Henry was Tarzan as you'd never seen him, towering, fearsome, and cinematic to the bone. He may have been done with the jungle, but fans weren't done with him. Even now, when you see a Tarzan that looks like he could tear through a tank, you're seeing Mike Henry's shadow. Because for 3 unforgettable films, he didn't just survive the jungle, he owned it. Ron Ely, the Tarzan who finally spoke. Ron Ely stepped into the jungle at a moment when the legend was running thin. The film series had worn itself out, and audiences were beginning to drift. The loincloth had become a costume, the roar a gimmick. What the character needed wasn't another stuntman with muscles, it needed a reinvention. With the Tarzan television series in the mid-1960s, Ely delivered exactly that. He became the first Tarzan since Elmo Lincoln to truly speak, not in grunts or short phrases, but in full, thoughtful dialogue. It was a gamble that risked alienating fans, but it redefined the character for a new era. Ely brought intelligence, restraint, and surprising emotional depth to the role. His Tarzan still climbed trees and wrestled animals, but he also questioned violence, protected the innocent with intention, and expressed a clear moral code. He wasn't just reacting to the jungle. He was interpreting it, weighing it, navigating it with purpose. The image of a man raised by apes became, under Ely, a metaphor for someone finding balance between instinct and ethics. In many ways, his version was more complex than the films had ever allowed. The demands of the show were brutal. Ely, a trained athlete, but not a stuntman by profession, insisted on performing almost all of his own physical work. The result was a body pushed to its limits, broken bones, deep cuts, dislocated joints, and a constant risk of serious injury. Still, he carried the series for 2 full seasons, and in doing so, brought Tarzan into the homes of millions, not as a caricature, but as a man. He may not have had the blockbuster films behind him, but Ron Ely gave Tarzan something none of his predecessors had, a mind as powerful as his body. Steve Sipek, the Tarzan who vanished into legend. Steve Sipek didn't just play Tarzan. He lived in his shadow long after the cameras stopped rolling. Known professionally as Steve Hawks during his brief cinematic run, he starred in a pair of low-budget Spanish-language Tarzan films in the mid-1960s. These weren't part of the Hollywood canon, and the sets lacked the polish of an MGM backlit, but what they lacked in budget, they made up for in intensity. Hawks portrayed a raw, brooding Tarzan, less a jungle king and more a mythic wanderer, caught between the modern world and the wild. For a short time, he felt like the last real relic of a fading cinematic tradition. Unlike most actors who played the role, Sipek's Tarzan wasn't molded by studios or studio trainers. He was built by instinct, by grit, and by something strangely real. Off-screen, his life mirrored the characters more than most. After the films faded into obscurity, he retreated from spotlight and began living with big cats, literally. In rural Florida, surrounded by lions and tigers, he created his own jungle sanctuary. Locals whispered stories. Journalists occasionally came knocking. But to most, he had disappeared. It was as though Tarzan had walked off set and kept going, never returning to civilization. His legacy exists at the edge of the Tarzan mythology, not widely known, not often mentioned, but impossible to ignore once discovered. There's something magnetic about the actors who only played the role once or twice, but whose entire lives seem haunted by it. For Steve Sipek, Tarzan wasn't just a part he played. It was a path he followed. His name may not appear on studio walls or fan convention banners, but in the deeper corners of the legend, he remains one of its most mysterious figures. Bruce Bennett, Herman Brix, the Tarzan who was too authentic for his time. Bruce Bennett, known in his earlier film days as Herman Brix, brought a version of Tarzan to the screen that was truer to the original novels than most audiences had ever seen, and perhaps more than they were ready for. A former Olympic silver medalist in shot put, he was selected in the 1930s to take over the role from Buster Crabbe, but a training injury delayed his debut. When he finally appeared in The New Adventures of Tarzan, 1935, it was not under the bright lights of a studio backlit, but in the jungles of Guatemala, shot on location in rugged conditions that mirrored the story itself. His portrayal was a radical departure from the growling, monosyllabic jungle man that audiences had come to expect. Bennett's Tarzan was articulate, dignified, and cultured, fluent in English and driven by intellect as much as strength. This was the Tarzan of Edgar Rice Burroughs' imagination, a man of noble bearing, educated in Europe, capable of leaping through the trees, yet just as likely to engage in strategy or diplomacy. It was a performance grounded in realism, not fantasy, and while it delighted the purists, it confused the casual crowd. The serial's independent production and minimal distribution meant that Bennett's take didn't reach the same audiences as the MGM films. As a result, his performance was largely overshadowed, left to fade in the background of louder, more iconic portrayals. But in retrospect, his work is recognized as one of the most faithful versions ever put to screen, and one of the most underappreciated. Bennett would go on to enjoy a long and respected Hollywood career, even shedding the Tarzan image entirely. But for those who look past the legends and into the text, his Tarzan stands out as the one who may have gotten it right, just too soon. Buster Crabbe, the Tarzan who couldn't be contained. Buster Crabbe was born to be larger than life. Before he ever stepped onto a soundstage, he'd already conquered the world as an Olympic gold medalist in swimming, the same pedigree that made Johnny Weissmuller a star. Hollywood saw the athleticism, the striking looks, and the confident charisma, and did what it always did in the 1930s, offered him a jungle. Crabbe accepted, starring in Tarzan the Fearless, 1933, a low-budget serial that tried to capitalize on the sudden Tarzan craze. It should have made him a rival to Weissmuller. Instead, it became a single, curious detour in a career that would soon move far beyond the trees. His Tarzan was fierce, fast, and visibly younger than what audiences were used to. There was a restless energy to him, a sense that this wild man wasn't content to stay in the jungle very long. And he didn't. The film was modest, the reception lukewarm, and Crabbe quickly realized he didn't need to hang from vines to stay relevant. Within a few years, he would become one of the most recognizable faces in fantasy and sci-fi, defining the look and tone of Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, roles that gave him far more creative range and a place in the cultural memory that Tarzan never quite did. Still, the jungle clung to him. For years, clips from Tarzan the Fearless would resurface in compilations and documentaries, keeping his contribution alive in fragments. While Crabbe's time as Tarzan was short, it was part of a career defined by constant transformation. He was never meant to be just one kind of hero. The jungle was a launchpad, not a cage. Ray Corrigan, the man behind the muscle. Ray Crash Corrigan was never the star, but without him, the stars wouldn't have survived. In the golden age of jungle epics, when stunt work was raw, risky, and often unrehearsed, Corrigan was the man studios turned to when they needed someone who could take the hit, make the leap, or wear the beast suit. For years, he moved in and out of Tarzan films as an uncredited double, particularly for Johnny Weissmuller, whose physical limits were being tested more with each sequel. Corrigan wasn't glamorous, and he didn't deliver lines, but he did deliver impact, with a body built for danger and a stuntman's fearless resolve. His background in westerns and action serials made him ideal for the rigors of jungle filmmaking. Whether it was diving from cliffs, grappling with alligators, or staging brutal fight scenes, Corrigan was often the one behind the mask, or under the costume. In some productions, he even donned ape suits to portray Tarzan's animal companions, a task that required not just physical endurance, but an ability to mimic primal movement with convincing power. The public never knew his name, but directors did. So did the cast and crew. He was the guy who always delivered, even when it meant walking away bruised, bloodied, or completely unseen. He also owned a ranch, Corriganville, which became a popular filming location for jungle and western scenes, further intertwining his legacy with Hollywood's action history. Ray Corrigan didn't headline posters or receive fan mail for playing Tarzan. But when the real stars couldn't risk the fall, he took it for them. He was the uncredited protector of the legend, the man whose body kept the illusion alive, one dangerous scene at a time. Clint Walker, the Tarzan who turned it down. Clint Walker never played Tarzan, but he came closer than almost anyone who didn't. In the late 1950s, when the search began for a new jungle king to replace the aging icons of the era, Walker's name surged to the top of the list. With his towering frame, calm authority, and a presence that could quiet a room, he seemed destined for the role. The studio wanted him. The screen tests were done. All that remained was the contract. And then he said no. At the time, Walker was already a rising star, best known for his role as Cheyenne Bodie in the hit TV Western Cheyenne. He had the perfect look, broad-shouldered, statuesque, with a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. But Tarzan, for all its glamour, came with baggage. The role had a history of typecasting its actors, locking them into the jungle and making it difficult to move beyond it. Walker, perceptive and deliberate, saw the danger in that. He chose a different path, one that kept him in cowboy boots and frontier dust, far from the vines. The decision added a strange footnote to Tarzan lore. Had Walker accepted, the entire tone of the character may have shifted. His natural poise and stoicism could have made Tarzan more regal, more introspective, perhaps even a mythic figure of silent strength rather than raw instinct. Instead, the role passed to others, and Walker's legacy remained tethered to the Old West. Yet in the shadows of the franchise, his presence still lingers, the man who looked like he should have played Tarzan but never did. Sometimes the roles we refuse say as much as the ones we accept. Clint Walker didn't need the jungle. In the end, it needed him. The role of Tarzan has passed through many hands, from Olympians to actors, stuntmen to stars, and even those who turned it down. Each brought something unique: strength, grace, intellect, danger, or mystery. Whether they swung through just one film or carried the role across years, they all became part of a larger legacy, one rooted in adventure, imagination, and the endless appeal of the jungle hero. These 12 names represent some of the most fascinating chapters in Tarzan's on-screen history. But now we want to hear from you. Who's your favorite Tarzan? Did we miss someone you think deserves a spot in the legend? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to read your thoughts and memories. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It helps immensely and honestly motivates me more than anything to keep creating deep dive content like this. Your support makes a huge difference. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep your eyes on the treetops. You never know who might swing by next.